see Denton from Hurricane Electric.
Live for 20 minutes. Hi, everybody. I used to be a government regulator, and people used to appear before me, and I kind of know that it's important to set a good tone. So I'd be interested in your comments, not really about what I have to say, but whether it sets the right tone. Part of what we're doing here is just some things that may be so obvious that you've done them all your lives, or all your working lives, and you know exactly what we're talking about. And for some, it may be new information. But this presentation is built up over experience with Hurricane Electric in setting up, in connecting to exchange points and what they look for, and also with some assistance from Packet Clearinghouse as to their ideas. And so these are just sort of very simple ideas, and I'm sorry if that is not a terribly sophisticated approach, but it may be of use to some people, and we hope it will be. So Hurricane Electric participates in more than 100 internet exchanges around the world, and it's had some experience in this business. So we're here to present those experiences and tell you what Hurricane Electric looks for in an internet exchange point. Again, I have to say, this may be perfectly obvious to everybody, but the first thing is to list your participants. Autonomous system numbers, switch fabric IPv4 and v6 addresses, and peering contact information. So make sure you can be found. The idea of listing your participants is that current and prospective participants in your exchange need to have information on peering sessions, increase your peer traffic, and to grow revenue. So network operators continuously evaluate additional IXPs for potential expansion. To make this determination, they need participant autonomous system numbers and ideally to see what prefixes those peers advertise to root server at the exchange. Now here I've mistaken this. I said there's two ways to do this locally and globally, but of course the website is immediately global, so we'll forget that. But here's an example of Seattle Exchange of how it lists its members and the information is contained, and that's one way to do it. There's also the JSON API, which is increasingly used, and it allows anyone to automate the collection of current member lists. So list your participants. Not complicated, but needs to be done. The other thing is that there's various ways to get your exchange listed publicly. There's at least 4, and there may be more. So we'll discuss them in turn. You've done a lot to get your internet exchange point up and running. You've talked to network operators, you've recruited participation, you've negotiated with data center operators for space to install exchange switches, you obtained, deployed, and maintained hardware for the exchange, you catalyze ongoing communications between your participants. So the last step is publicizing your exchange, and that's how you maximize its value to those current participants and those who could benefit from it. Four kind of companies do this, or organizations. Packet Clearinghouse, you can approach them, they have information, and you will do the work of getting that out. Peering DB, network operators are the ones who provide this information, and you should encourage your members to register and list themselves as being connected to your exchange. So they will need to make the request to list your exchange. Wikipedia, get your article up and running, make sure you're known, and it's perfectly reasonable to advertise yourself through Wikipedia, and it's commonly used. Telegeography, you don't need to do anything, they will come and get you, and, but that's an important way to get yourself known. Now this is, I hope this is not too directive, but maintain boundaries and don't be greedy. The first thing is that you want to be the internet switch fabric your participants expect and need, and nothing more. ISPs operate layer 3 networks, which run on top of layer 2 substrate, in this case your internet exchange. So maintaining a clear boundary separation and division of responsibilities allows everyone to do the job they expect to do, minimizes costs, and preempts unpleasant surprises. Here's a controversial statement. Of course you can charge fees based on port size, but you don't want to penalize the thing you want to encourage. You want to encourage the maximum flow of traffic through your exchange point. So it's very important to make sure that as the volume increases, your average bit cost price goes down. Third thing I would say is don't try to get your participants to peer. Don't try to force peering with anybody. This will scare away larger networks and will hinder growth. Advice and assistance is freely available. There's lots of examples of successes and failures. There's many colleagues in this business, and you can talk to them. Packet Clearinghouse maintains a service of information and training and logistics, and has enabled hundreds of exchange points over the more than 20 years, and there's support to you at, get this, no cost. So that's an important factor to know, to consider if you're looking for help. What does Hurricane Electric look for in an exchange? The supreme commandment of an exchange is to reduce the average per bit delivery cost. That is the supreme commandment that the operator will be looking for. It needs to increase the supply of bandwidth to keep up with growing demand. It wants to improve quality, reduce loss, latency, out-of-order delivery, and jitter. And it needs to meet and connect with new potential customers. So how is it evaluated? First, there's a correlation and net flow analysis of current traffic sources and destination ASs with ASs participating in the exchange. 2, the number of networks present in the data center where the exchange is hosted and those nearby or easily accessible. 3, reasonably placed dark fiber cross-connects within the data center. 4, availability of dark fiber between the exchange facility and our customers and other data centers. And 5, cost of long-haul circuits from the nearest existing Hurricane Electric points of presence to the exchange's location. This is, I think, is an important thing to consider. Some internet service providers with a naive conception of internet economics sometimes try to preclude competition through barriers to new market entry. An example of this is the occasional requirement that only network operators licensed as ISPs by their local regulator may participate in exchange. These kinds of regulatory barriers have no real use other than to protect profits of the incumbent carriers. It's self-defeating because it precludes the participation of both the content providers that customers want to reach and the international participants that local ISPs must pay to reach through transit. This restriction limits the growth of the exchange, further reducing attractiveness to new participants in a cycle of unfortunate, unintended consequences. So don't make participation in your exchange dependent upon any kind of legal or regulatory privilege in the local country. Logistics are essential. Updates of equipment are constant, and the real question is can any global shipping company perform door-to-door delivery in the country and charge all the customs and duties and taxes to the shipper? That's the key question. This means that the regulatory regime in the country is very important. Customs should be professional, transparent, and streamlined to facilitate business. Duties and taxes should be remitted directly to the government by the shipping company. And if there are any special service fees, Hurricane Electric certainly doesn't want to hear about it. So irregular and opaque customs processes hinder business and particularly curtail growth of the internet and telecom sector, which is so dependent on frequent equipment upgrades. So, relatively simple. List your membership. Get them on public directories. It helps your exchange to grow and it supports your members. Large networks rely on public membership information when making decisions about where to put equipment. Imposing fees and license requirements to join your exchange will stifle its growth. And certain telecommunications regulations and non-standard customs procedures in your country may further discourage foreign networks from joining. So keep it clean, keep it honest, and keep it growing. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be delighted to take them, even if I... Go ahead. Any? Alrighty. Thank you very much.
Any question? Okay, thank you, Timothy. We have Nishal, but with some change. He's going to talk about total internet security on a country. But maybe root servers are interesting for people too. If you can go brief after presentation. Thank you, Nishal.
You've got two versions of it, say? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Keynote, good. Yeah, cool.
Right, I'm up. Good afternoon, everybody. I realize I'm between you and the last session and tea, probably all those cancer sticks that I see so popular here. So I'll try to be brief. First, my apologies. There was a bit of confusion around what the topic for today would be about. I wasn't scheduled to speak, and then I was asked to present someone else's slides, and it seems that there was some confusion about whether or not I could present someone else's slides. So I've come up with something new that we wrote during the break. And now I'm just making up for those 20 minutes that I have to fill, because these slides are like only 10, and I'm going to go through them really quickly. So my name's Nisha. Some of you might know me. I'm new to the MENOG community. I'm really happy to be here. I'm very upset that there's a parallel track going on at the same time that I have to talk, so I'm going to speak to Hisham and the PC about this, and hopefully we'll fix that next time. I work at Packet Clearinghouse. We spend a lot of time cleaning all the packets that go through the internet. At least that's what some of you think, or some of you might have heard. In truth, we're a non-profit that works out of Berkeley in the United States. I've never been there. I work out of Johannesburg. And we try to do something that's really simple. We try to make the internet better, try to make the internet more secure. But this talk is not about PCH. It's about some observations that we have and ideas that we've presented to people before, sometimes regulatory folks, sometimes policy folks, sometimes technical people who don't necessarily see the obvious things. So if you thought that Mr. Denton's slides were about pointing out the obvious things that you may have missed, I've got news for you. I've got the same thing all over again. So apologies to Jim if you're in the room. I really don't have cool data like you do. I hope to be back here next year with something like that. But today is something more high level. So, when we think about the internet, really, at least the operators in the room know that the internet is not just this big cloud that we have. We know that the internet is actually 60,000 or about 60,000 individual clouds that are all linked together and make up this big network that we talk about, the internet. And I think everybody in this room really tries to work towards the same thing or wants the same thing. We want a tighter mesh of these clouds. This is the IXP forum, this is the peering forum. So we're talking about getting people connected. We're talking about peering. We're talking about taking what was a loose hierarchical structure in the 90s and probably early 2000s into a tight meshed interweb. into something that's going to build us a more resilient, a more connected, a better internet. And well, you've heard all that stuff earlier. You've gone to all the other iStar meetings and all of that. The key is, though, that as we build this more meshed network, more meshed network, as we start to build an environment where we're closer to the people that we want to talk to, we're also closer to potential attackers. And the internet today, and those of you that have been around longer than I have, will certainly appreciate that the internet today is nowhere near as friendly as it was back in the days when, well, we all first got online. So we've come up with a set of ideas, and again, my apologies if this seems fairly common sense to most of you, but it, as Hisham and I were discussing earlier today, common sense isn't. So, simple ideas that you'd want to consider if you are involved in policy or involved in internet-related forums inside your economy. And the first thing is, in order to manage security in my country, I've got to have some measure of influence around the CCTLD, the country code top-level domain. And at the start, it means that this important national resource should be managed inside your country. Okay? So the people that are responsible for your CCTLD, are they actually from your country? Are they operating inside your country? Are they subject to the laws, the regulations, and the things that make your country sovereign? Now, some of us have very different ideas on what is good and what is bad, and what should be allowed on the internet and what shouldn't be allowed on the internet. And that's great. I mean, that's awesome because we're different people, we should have different opinions. But the one undeniable truth is that countries are sovereign. And if in a country it is the law that you cannot step twice on a sidewalk crack on a Sunday, then that's the laws that we have to respect. And those laws are what should be applicable to, well, things that matter to the country, like your CCTLD. So, for a start, is your CCTLD in country? Are the servers that run your CCTLDs, are they operated out of your country? I like to tell stories. Me talking without telling a story is very unnatural. So I'll tell you the story of .za. I'm South African. Don't let the looks fool you. I'm from Africa. In about 2004, 2005, the South African government decided that they wanted to get involved in running .za at the time. And of course, they know nothing about domain name administration or DNS or anything like that. But they decided that this was a good thing. We should be involved because we're the government. And up until that stage, it had been run by a university, I guess you could call him a university professor, Mike Laurie. He was a really good guy. He was doing what he and the rest of the community thought was best for the community at the time. So the government started making these noises about wanting to take over .za, and you know the kind of noises, right? With the black helicopters and the black vans and sirens in the middle. No sirens in the middle of the night. And as a result, what happened for us, very embarrassingly, when I think about it, is we moved all the stuff that ran .za, all the name servers for .za. None of them were available in South Africa at the time, simply because we feared that the government would come in, take over, and, well, let's just leave it at that. I'm happy to say that we've changed since then. We've reformed. We now have a multi-stakeholder, and you heard the guy from ICANN talk about the domain name business and how it should be run, so I won't do that. But we have all of that in place right now, and at least for us, running .za inside our country, it's done by the community. And that's important. At least for us, it's done by the community, for the community, and more importantly, under local jurisdiction. So stuff that matters according to South African law. I'm pushing buttons, but I don't see the screen change, so there we go. So the second thing that's important, at least towards the internet security in your country, is having copies of local DNS routes. Everybody here knows what a DNS root server is, so I'm not going to speak too much about what they are. But do you have a copy of this housed inside your country? Today it's trivial, with the exception of some stubborn, I don't know what to call them, some root operators who believe that Anycast doesn't work or isn't safe, and there are a few of those. just about all the forward-thinking, rational root server operators have DNS routes spread all over the world. We used to think about there being 13 DNS root servers, and lots of people, the DNS guys, always correct that very quickly. There are 13 numbers, there's more than 1,000 DNS root servers. So is there a copy in your country? Are there more than one copies in your country? Are they spread out? That's a good thing to have. But aside from just the DNS roots, as I said earlier on, is there a copy of your CCTLD hosted inside your country? And is there a copy of other TLDs hosted inside your country? So the goal here is to try to build autonomy, right? The goal here is to try to say, what is it that's going to keep our internet economy running if we're ever under some sort of an attack? And if you're doing frequent business with a country that's next door to you, or even halfway across the world, but it's important for you to try to at least do DNS resolution for them, then it should be really important for you to have those resources available to you, close to you, and, well, we'll see where that goes now. And it all comes up to this, the internet exchange point. It's a pet peeve of mine when I hear people talking about national internet exchange points. That drives me crazy, it really does. Jane's laughing, she knows me. Because there's no such thing, there should be no such thing as a national internet exchange point. What there should be are internet exchange points that connect people, connect industry in different areas in your country. And the general rule of thumb that we've found is that if you have an environment where there's a population of, say, 300 or so thousand people, if there's telecoms infrastructure in that environment, so it's no point having 300,000 people, but they're communicating via smoke signal. And if they're involved in some sort of internet-related business or online and looking at information and caring about what's on the internet, then that's probably a good place to start an internet exchange point. When people think about exchange points, they immediately think about big gigabits a second or terabits a second of information. And that's only part of what an exchange point can become. The value of the exchange point is really in being able to do local communication, local, domestic, quick, easy, cheap communication. And I like the words that were on one of the slides before this. It's a phrase I use quite often, lowering the average per bit delivery cost. So that's what your exchange point should be. Not all exchange points are equal. Not all were meant to be equal. But if it's making, or if it's helping to improve the spread of information, the flow of information to keep that more local, that's a good thing. So if you're sitting in here, if you have an exchange point in your country and you think, we're done, we did this 20 years ago, I've got news for you. Why do you have just one? Okay? If you're in a small country, Vatican City, for example, or I lived in an island called Mauritius, which you probably cannot find on a map, then yeah, probably then, because the locale is so small, one exchange point should work. But at least with the geography of this region, there are very few countries that can happily say, we only need one internet exchange point, and by the way, this is now the national one. It's not. It's the first exchange point, so don't call it that. Earlier on this morning, and I spoke about Jim earlier on, Jim had a great talk about local content. And you need all of this. You need a place to have local content. You need a place to have your local internet exchange point. So when you're thinking about the security of your country, at least the internet security in your country, an important thing for you to be considering is, are there competing carrier-neutral data centers? Okay? We didn't have this in my country for a long time. We were forced into some sort of monopoly by, well, one operator. That's a monopoly, really. Now we have a duopoly, so you're in one of two locations. And that really isn't giving the market a chance to grow, at least not in my country. So if you're a data center operator, this is a call. South Africa is looking for your business. But if you're a regulator, if you're a policymaker, if you're a business person looking into opportunities, data centers are going to grow. Think about every recommendation you've read from all the vendors out there. Cisco, we're going to have X petabytes a second by the year 2020 and all of that. All of that stuff has got to go somewhere, okay? And the somewhere that's making it into, that all of the stuff is making it into these days are data centers. So I wish I had money for data centers actually, but I don't. Probably one of the less obvious things when we talk about security is the need for competitive local fiber. And I often get people looking at me, especially when I do this in my country, when they go, huh? How does fiber relate to security? Well, as the slide says, the natural user predilection is to choose the fastest path to a resource. That's a lot of fancy words for saying users want stuff quickly. So, if there's no fiber resources available, or if the fiber resources that are in the country are constrained, what's going to happen is users are probably not going to choose to use a resource that's available in that country or in that economy. They're going to choose a resource that's out of your country. And how can you have any measure of control or security, how can you attach any measure of security to a resource that is outside of your jurisdiction? So if you're concerned about security, if you're worried about how do I make things more secure, start looking at more than just things like hacking into iPhones and cryptography. Start worrying about things like, is it easy for people to put fiber in the ground and get that fiber lit up? Because all of that impacts on our security as well. And probably the last point that I want to touch on, because I haven't timed myself, but I think I'm running out of time soon, is the need for a CERT, a computer emergency response teams. Those of you from the more developed parts of the region will know, well, most of you have CERTs already, but whom do you contact when there's a problem? Whom do you run to when you need assistance in finding somebody? Email's great, but is there a central resource that can help coordinate a lot of this stuff? Many, many years ago, there used to be a really good operator security list called NSPsec. I think that's still there, but that's closed. That's only open to networks, people that are working in the ISP industry. And while NSPsec and tools like INOC-DBA are great, often people just want to talk to another person. So if there's something that's happening right now in Tehran, I know 2 contacts in that country. I can probably call them and hopefully they can put me in touch with someone that can help me resolve my issue. But wouldn't it be useful if everybody or every economy had an organization, had a CERT that could take responsibility and that could feedback for the security issues in their country? And certs, again, they're not expensive things. When people think about certs, they think about big fancy NOCs with hundreds of screens going on and matrix sort of stuff in the background. Really, what you're looking for is somebody that has some measure of security intelligence, so they understand how things work in the internet world, and potentially even graduates that you could pick up and work and train with. On my day job, PCH, we operate certs for many small countries that don't have the technical skills or don't have the people, and really all that it is being the first line just in case somebody needs to find someone who can help out with the problem later on. So because all of this is going on the interwebs and they'll be available for you to download later on, if you're interested, there's the complete checklist. I'm not going to go through all of them. Pretty much most of the stuff are things that we've spoken about already. I didn't talk about DNSSEC because there was a conversation about it this morning. Aside from your CCTLD in country, get it signed. And as we said this morning, DNSSEC is really, really, really boring. But the cool thing about DNSSEC are the applications that can come out of it. Using TLSA, using DANE. Do you really want to continue to pay certificate authorities who validate third parties? Do you believe them? Do any of you here really think that the certificate authorities don't have backdoors to security agencies in other countries? I don't. Maybe it's me, maybe it's just because I'm paranoid, but I, for one, don't trust the certificate authorities. So cool tools like TLSA, DANE, that's the future, and you can only get to that if you're DNSSEC signed. And pretty much we spoke about everything else. I won't talk too much about that. Some tips for the policy folk, if you're in the room, if you're in the wrong place after lunch and not on the other side, things that you should worry about is none of what I'm talking about here costs lots of money. I know when people talk about internet exchange points, for example, they always think, oh, I've got to fork out $500,000 US to start with. Jane has a great saying for this, gold plating. Don't gold plate from the start. Build into what you need. And it's the same whether you're building an exchange point or a cert. Plan for what you need now and you'll get scales. Okay? It's actually not that difficult to grow stuff. As I said, the rest of it is there. It's potentially very interesting for the policymakers, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. And this is the IXP session. So before you ask me